Thanks everyone for coming. This is our presentation on Furl everything. So we talk a bit about some of the different sail handling systems out there, both for upwind and downwind sailing. My name is Austin, and on the phone with me is Jack Orr. I work out of the Annapolis office and do a bit of cruising and racing and one design sales. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're working out of?
Hi, yeah, I'm Jack Orr from North Sails in Milford, Connecticut. I've been here since about 2000, but I've been a sailmaker since 1986. So it's pretty cool. This whole furling thing is something that's been an evolution, kind of like sailcloth has been since I started sailmaking. When I started, it was hanks and external slides. So it's interesting to see the evolution of furling.
Yeah, and we want to thank Keith Church out of North Sail, Chicago, as he was supposed to be here today, but he had a personal matter come up, and he wanted to thank us all for taking this over. And everything is okay, not to worry. And we just want to thank him for coming up with this, as he was kind of the brainchild behind this presentation. So starting off, we're going to talk a little bit about cruising versus racing performance and kind of the expectations in those sails and what we should look for. We're then going to get right into the meat of it with the different mainsail furling systems out there, both in-mast and in-boom, and then take a look at those compared to some of the other handling systems. We're going to touch on how headsail furling systems have changed a bit in the last 2-3 decades, and then we're going to close out with downwind sails, both code zeros and spinnakers, and how those sails furl as well. So why should we furl? How does that look for the cruiser and the racer, and what have you seen develop over the last 10-20 years, Jack?
Yeah, well, like I said, when I first started, they were just starting to invent roller furlers, and a lot of them still had wires in them, and then you had to stitch the sail along the wire. And then the Harkin and ProFurl came out with their foil systems, which are really nice. But essentially, the idea is that handling sails in the sort of traditional methods is really hard, especially if you're sailing with 1 or 2 or 3 people and trying to muscle the sails around and get them attached to the forestay. And even with the mainsail, a lot of times feeding the slides on, it's a real hassle. So there's compromises along the way, just like with anything, but the trade-off of being able to handle big sails with the shorthanded amount of people is a huge advantage, and it's really made sailing a lot better over the last 25 years.
So you're going to hear us talk a lot about mainsail handling as we, when we talk about furling, because we're always gearing back towards furling makes the mainsail handling easier. And then the other term we're going to use is a standard mainsail. Jack, can you define a standard mainsail for us really quick, just so that everyone knows what we mean when we say a standard mainsail versus, say, an in-mast or an in-boom main?
Sure, yeah. A standard mainsail is typically 4 battens or more, sometimes full, sometimes part way across the leech. And these battens, essentially, they're horizontal. They go parallel with the foot sometimes they're at an angle with the leech. But the whole idea is that these battens provide support to the back of the sail in particular to make sure that, as you can see in this picture, the sail's nice and twisted. And essentially, the battens are supporting the sail, making sure that the leech doesn't cup up and basically, like an airplane flap, make a big flap up. They're twisting off nicely so the airflow can work its way off. The other thing about a standard mainsail is it may have sliders or a rope that goes up a groove in the luff and go up the mainsail. And that's how they attach to the main.
So Jack, in terms of cruising, what are maybe some potential pitfalls in the handling of these mains, and why do some people steer away from this style of main, even though it might be the best performance option in terms of the actual sailing of the boat?
Well, it's, once again, it's all about handling. It's about weight, and it's about how easy and smoothly the sail works. I mean, slides, even though we've done a great job over the years working on better and better sliders and cars and so on, they still they have a certain amount of weight and they add expense, and they also they just don't always work smoothly all the time. So dropping and hoisting the sail can be an issue with the sliders and having long battens and on the sail.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I personally know, I hate dealing with the sail covers, especially on a cruising boat, maybe where the boom is up very high, having to reach up. And I'm on the taller side, and I still struggle getting the sail cover on. So I know a lot of people hate that part of the standard mainsail as well. Even though, like we said, it is probably performance wise for the boat sailing, it's the best option out there for you. Which
right,
kind of,
and like we talked about before, a lot of guys, cruising guys, just sail around with their Genoa unfurled and their main still on the boom, just because they don't want to deal with the taking off the cover, opening everything up, and hoisting the sail up. So
yeah. So getting into the two furling systems that have both kind of developed, these are kind of two separate camps that always have their pros and their cons and their various expenses associated along with them. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences between in-mast and in-boom furling?
Sure.
Just briefly before we get more in depth into what all these, what do these systems entail?
Yeah. Well, for sure. The picture on the left with the English looks like an oyster. That's an in-mast furling system. You can see that it's got a less aggressive roach on the sail. It's got a little bit of hollow actually, and some vertical battens. And so that sail, it has a foil inside of on a mandrel inside the mast. And so you basically twist that mandrel and it rolls the sail up just like your roller furling jib. The one on the right is a in-boom furling. And instead, the mandrel's inside of the boom. And the benefit to this is you can actually make a bigger sail, more like a conventional battened sail with horizontal battens that can furl up in the boom.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that just to make sure that everyone's on the same page on the term roach, and I think that's a really big comparison between these two systems, is can you define roach for me really fast before we move on?
Yeah, sure. Like if you see the picture of the oyster, if you picture a triangle, even like the Genoa, you can really see it. There's a hollow in the leech, and the triangle is a true triangle. And anything, if you imagined a straight line, yeah, that's great. If you imagine a straight line there, anything that's outside of that straight line towards the backstay would be considered roach. And then anything inside of that line would be considered hollow. So that's basically sail area that's not or is providing drive to the sail plan.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's probably where I see the biggest difference between these two systems is one, you can either have maybe no roach or just a slight bit of positive roach, where with the end boom, you still can get a pretty generous roach closer to your normal mainsail. Right. So kind of summarizing the pros and cons of in-mast furling systems, can you get into that just a bit as you go through this list?
The really big pro to in-mast furling is that it's just easier to unroll and roll the sail up. It's less critical about wind angle. It's less critical about boom angle. And it's sort of one of those things that when it works properly, which it should, the sail rolls up very easily and unrolls very easily. Reefing, you just like on a Genoa, you put a few twists in the drum, turns the sail inside the mast, and it shortens the sail up. And just like a Genoa, the nice thing is that as you furl it, the foot gets shorter, but the luff gets shorter as well. So you're losing area very quickly. And that's really nice for a lot of shorthanded sailors, especially people that are, beginning sailors, or people that just plain have a boat that doesn't require as much sail area for the boat to perform. The in-mast furling is really great. Now, The bad part to that is that you have less area in general, even if you get some battens on there. If they do start to jam, they're harder to deal with. The mandrel inside the mast is weight up high, which is bad for performance. And then you do get some wear and tear with the sail going in and out through this tiny opening all the time.
Mm-hmm. Are there some different materials and constructions that we can use to maybe combat these performance losses? And
Sure.
can you walk us through the kind of the 4 levels of the construction methods that we can use to build these sails?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Crosscut Dacron, that's sort of the go-to if you were going to buy an OEM sail, which is typically the lowest cost method to start with an entry-level style sail. Dacron's great. It's very easy to maintain, to keep clean. It doesn't mildew as easily. It's super tough. I mean, obviously, they've been using these sails offshore. Dacron has been the standard for cruising, blue water cruising sailors for 50 years. It's extremely tough. It's pretty good in UV, and a lot of times with some of these sails, the cloth is actually outlasts the stitching. The sort of the drawback to crosscut sails are that they're heavy, they're stretchy, and compared to other methods, and they're heavy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I did say they are heavy. So they're heavy, and so that's weight aloft, and just plain handling them and getting them around on the boat is tough.
Yeah. So how's the life cycle on a Dacron sail? Say, as we mentioned earlier, that the sails stretch relatively easily in comparison with some of their higher tenacity brethren. What happens when those sails stretch out? Where are you going to see the performance losses? Is it a particular point of sail? Is it going to be in the furling, or is it kind of all of the
Well,
above?
it's a little bit of everything, right? I mean, the thing about Dacron is that's where you get into the discussion about what's performance life versus ultimate structural life. And Dacron's really tough, and it's got a really long structural life. Like these sails won't break, maybe for 20 years or maybe more. But the bad news is that as they get stretchy, they lose their aerodynamic shape when they're flying. So that's a case of, like you're talking about, Austin, when the wind puffs up, you get a lot more load in the sail. It gets stretchy, it loses its aerodynamic shape, and then the boat tips over instead of moving forward. The other thing that happens is as they sort of get stretchy and soft over time, when you want to furl the sail, it sort of wraps on itself because it's so stretchy. So that's the drawback to the, in the long term on a crosscut style sail.
Gotcha. So as we move into the more advanced techniques like tri-radial, I think if you could just hit on both tri-radial Dacron, the advantages there, and then get into the laminates as well as we construct these in-mast mains.
Sure. And if you look at this picture, you can see exactly the illustration, what the difference is between a crosscut sail and a radial type sail. And radial sails really started out in the late 1980s, early 90s. That was state of the art. And essentially the great thing about radial construction is they've figured out how to manufacture cloth so that you could put the strong threads perpendicular to the cloth that we make for crosscut sails. And this basically allows you to put the cloth, the strong direction of the cloth, more targeted directions to match the loads in the sail. So like in this sail, you can see how the seams in the sail are matching the loads much better. Mm-hmm. The other great thing about radial construction is that you can put shaping in all of those seams as opposed to just the seams that go across horizontally on the sail. So you get a much smoother sail. Even if you're using a radian, which is our radial Dacron cloth, you're matching the loads much better. So even though you have to use a similar weight that you would to crosscut in overall cloth weight, it's going to hold its shape much better as the wind increases than a crosscut sail. And then
So as we look at that in a like a cost comparison versus overall life and aerodynamics and structure, so where do we fall on that curve? Obviously, sails are probably going to be a little bit more expensive, but are we gaining, handling and durability and aerodynamic shape over that time with the cost?
exactly. And the thing is that, like I said, going back to performance life versus structural life, crosscut sails basically have the shortest performance life. So, where a Dacron sail might have a performance life of 3 or 4 seasons, maybe, a radial type sail, even if it's made out of Dacron, will have a longer performance life, maybe 5 or 6 seasons. Its performance life will last, it'll match the structural life much better. And then when you get to laminates, it's even more pronounced.
Okay.
The structural life may be shorter ultimately, but the performance life lasts up until the time the structural life starts to be a problem.
Okay. And at North, obviously, we have 3DI technology, and I get asked a lot, I've heard about 3DI and all the different options. Is it a product for cruising? And then also, can it work with my in-mast furling system as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's a total misconception that high-tech sails and either string sails or 3DI sails or even laminate sails with high-tech fibers in them, that you can't furl them. In fact, they actually furl better, and it's in a lot of cases, it's actually better for the sail as long as it's protected from UV and moisture and different things. It's better for the sail to roll up than to be folded up repeatedly in the same place over and over. I have a lot of people that ask that question, and the truth is that if you can furl the sail and keep it rolled and protected, it's better for the sail, and it'll actually have a smoother, nice shape longer if you furl it.
So can you tell us a little bit about 3DI, just briefly about what it is and how it differs from maybe some of the laminate options out there?
Yeah, well, one of the benefits to laminates compared to a polyester woven type sail is that you can make the cloth much less stretchy compared to a woven style sail. And the benefit of that is also that you can actually make the physical thickness of the cloth much thinner. And that's where 3DI really excels, because these sails are made, they're not made in a factory on a roll like conventional sailcloth. The sail is basically constructed from the raw materials, which are fibers and adhesive, and essentially, essentially raw material. They build a sail. The sail designer designs the sail, what the sail shape should look like. He takes that and sends it to the guys at the factory. They have an adjustable mold that's full scale, that they can adjust the sail into the flying shape of the sail out on their floor. And then they actually construct the sail out of a series of tapes. And these tapes are, they take carbon, Kevlar, aramid, however you want to call it, Spectra, Dyneema, very similar products, and polyester is another option. They actually take the big, thick bundles of yarns that come from the manufacturer, and they spread those out as filaments onto a tape. And that tape with adhesive, and they lay it in the load patterns and then put it up on the mold. And all of these tapes take on the shape of the mold, and then they laminate it and vacuum bag it and laminate it into a composite structure that's basically got no seams in it, no shaping seams, and is a one-piece composite structure. So the advantage to that is that we can put things like batten pockets, reinforcement patches, and all that stuff can basically be built right into the sail without adding any extra thickness, or much less thickness than you would for a conventional style sail.
And there's no mylar in these sails, right, either?
Yeah, and that's really, the probably 50% of the benefit is that you don't have that weak link of the plastic film that's either going to be flexed too many times and crack, or the sun gets to it eventually, and the UV basically damages it. On laminate sails, they make very nice sails, and it's a step up in performance from woven cloth. But at the end of the day, it's the mylar film inside that's going to be the weak link that is the downfall of even laminate cloth.
Okay, and a lot of these pictures have battens, even though they're in-mast sails, and there's a lot of debate out there about vertical battens in in-mast sails. You can do full, you can do partial. Here's an image of a sail with full.
Yeah, this guy's got the best of both worlds, doesn't he?
Where do you fall in that stance? And I know everyone's probably going to have a bit of a different opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you asked 50 people, 25 people would say each way. I've always sort of been on the conservative side, and I'm on less battens is better when it comes to these sails. Short battens for sure are always an issue because the sail will break down quicker at the end of the batten over time, and as they flog and so on, it just is really tough on the inboard end. The full battens are really cool, and the nice thing about them is because they're supporting the sail all the way up, just like a horizontal full batten. You can make them a little bit thinner, and they're a little bit lighter compared to if you had to do a shorter batten sometimes for the actual thickness of the batten. But they're a bear to get in and out. Once they're in, they're great, but getting them in and out, trying to hoist a sail and stick a 40-foot long batten in is really big an issue. And then obviously you're always going to have the concern of any furling in-mast or furling boom sail, you are always going to have the issue of how much room do you have either in the boom or in the cavity inside the mast, and the opening to the cavity. So if the battens stick out proud compared to the sail, they're going to hit that lip, and they either will get in and out easily, or they could just make the thickness of the sail too big inside the cavity. So I've always sort of hedged away from it, but lots of people love the full battens, and they do work nicely, and it's a performance increase for sure. It helps the sail twist better.
Yeah, and I'm probably more in the middle ground where it depends on the usage and the type of mast, where I'll either recommend or steer people away from it depending on how they're going to use the boat and where their priorities lie, essentially.
Well, and what mast they have. It's just
Exactly.
critical to pre-measure how much room they have in their cavity and what the opening size is. And if you can't fit it in there, it's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Moving into in-boom furling, can you briefly touch on the way it works, and then we'll get more into the pros and cons and costs associated with it.
Yeah, sure. In-boom furling is something that's sort of popped up in the last 15 years. It's really nice. It sort of started on bigger boats, and it's worked its way down. And like you said earlier, if you got a boom that's pretty high and you can't reach it physically when you're raising and lowering the sail, this is really a super retrofit that you can make, or if you get a boat with it to begin with. But essentially the way it works is the boom has a mandrel with a foil in it that attaches to the foot of the sail, the tack and clew attached to the mandrel, and you either pull on a line, or you could have electric or hydraulic ability to turn that mandrel, and then basically there's usually a foil on the back of the mast, which is very smooth, that has a rope that goes in it, just like on your headsail. And you would put the halyard on, and you pull it out of the furler, and then when you're ready to furl it up, you ease the halyard and just wind it up. It's pretty great. It's really nice.
So what's the big advantage to in-boom furling, other than, you have gravity helping you and stuff like that? How does the roach profile compare with a standard mainsail, and then also compare with an in-mast mainsail?
Yeah, well, if you see a lot of pictures of these, and if you check the manufacturer's specifications, you'll see that the mainsail that you can achieve, the amount of girth and roach on the sail, is very close to a standard full batten mainsail that we would make for a conventional type sail. So from a performance standpoint, In-boom furling is a big step up in performance compared to in-mast.
Yeah. So, and then the pros and cons, obviously, it sounds like it could be something that, oh, it's pretty cool. It could be too good to be true. Or is there cons on that system? Is it a pretty
Well, the pros are just, the same thing as they are for in-mast.
Mhm.
And basically it's, you don't have to, you can do it so that you don't have to leave the cockpit, which is awesome.
Mhm.
Reefing is very easy. You don't have to worry about pulling on reefing lines. If you don't really need a super skilled person to operate the halyard and the furler, as compared to when you're doing conventional reefing, and which is really nice. In heavy weather, you can have both guys or two people in the cockpit helping out. It's a lot smoother compared to a conventional sail.
Mhm. Is it something that I could convert say my boat doesn't come with in-boom furling, I just have a standard rig. Would I go out and buy the boom from the manufacturer and then get a new sail made? What's that process look like, just for anyone who might be curious?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had plenty of customers do. I've probably had half of the people that I've made in-boom furling sails be retrofits. Now, it's not that easy to retrofit the sail, so most times you're going to have to get a new sail, and you'll have to get a new boom, clearly. But it's a great retrofit. There are plenty of the guys that work with the manufacturers. There will be a local guy in your area that has been trained to do this, and it works really well. You might lose a little bit of luff length because the boom is much bigger compared to a standard boom, and maybe the sail can't hoist quite as far to the top as your old sail, but typically it's pretty close in size. And it's really it's once you get somebody to measure it, and they're very professional. They're very strict about the specifications for us when we build the new sail. So it's pretty hard to go too wrong by retrofitting to in-boom furling.
Gotcha. So I have a quick video here just to show people what operating a system looks like. And before I get into it, I was just curious, do the same rules of trying to get towards maybe a lower stretch material apply to in-boom like we were talking about previously with In-Mast?
Yeah, well, the great thing is the lower stretch material, the actual physical thickness of the sail goes down, especially in the patches and the reinforcements and so on. So you get a much lighter sail, and it can wind up in that cavity pretty easily compared to a sail that's woven cloth, which you're just never going to get around that.
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is you look at how everything kind of has to line up perfectly when it furls. And when a sail's new, in theory, it should always, line up really well. But if one part of the sail is stretching more than the other part, I think that's when you see the issues arise from these in-boom sails, where either the luff tape's not stacking on itself or the battens are maybe twisting.
Boom angle is critical when you're hoisting and dropping these sails. Another thing is something to always consider with these sails is the sail coat. Sail coat is basically McLube that you can spray all over the sail, and it does two things. It sort of protects it against mildew and dirt, and so it sheds water instead of absorbing the water as much. And the other really nice thing is it actually makes the surface of the sail much more slippery. So having less friction on the sail actually lets it wind much tighter when you're winding it on the mandrel.
Is that true for both in-mast and in-boom sails?
Same thing. Like I've had guys both methods. It's with an in-mast furling, people tend to shy away from it because it costs a little bit more money. And they go, well, it's staying dry inside the mast and so on, and that's great, but the truth is it just winds so much tighter when the surface is slippery. Same on a Genoa, if you put the sail coat on it, it'll wind up tighter.
Yeah. Are there any other mainsail systems out there that people could maybe consider for someone who's not ready to take a massive leap in buying a new sail and changing a whole spar or boom out?
Yeah, well, lazy jacks and Dutchmans are really the two things that have been traditionally methods for handling full batten sails in particular. And if you have nice luff sliders on your sail, which is key, both kinds of handling systems are great. Because if the sail can go up and down easily, then these two methods really help handle the sail as it falls down and stacks up on the boom. The lazy jacks are easier to retrofit. It requires a rigger sometimes, but it does work very well. And the nice thing about, if you go back to the slides of lazy jacks, one of the nice thing about them is that you can pull them out of the way. You just basically ease the line way off. You can pull them forward and hook them on a horn or something, and they're not interfering with the sail when you're sailing around. If you go to Dutchman system's really great in that it works. It's very reliable once you have it adjusted. And if you ever had to reef shorthanded, the Dutchman system is really super, because the sail is just not going to fall off of the boom as you're trying to wrestle it down to its reef point. Now, the drawback to Dutchman is we don't like to poke holes in sails, but it does work pretty well. And the way the Dutchmans work is that you have two or three or four control lines that weave through the sail and are attached to a topping lift. And that topping lift and those control lines are always there. So when you're sailing around, you can ease those off so the sail sort of flops around the way you like in light air, but they're always hanging out there. So if you don't like to have these control lines hanging out all the time, creating windage and, flopping around, probably the Dutchman isn't for you. But whereas lazy jacks you can pull out of the way. But that being said, Dutchmans are super reliable. They've been around for many years. The parts are strong and they do work well.
So getting into Headsail furling systems a bit, obviously you mentioned they've been out for decades now, and they've had their improvements over the years. So I don't think we're really going to get into too much the actual hardware side of things, because I feel like most people are pretty familiar with it. What are some features that you should get on your headsails when you do have a headsail furling system to get the full benefit of roller reefing and stowage and things like that?
Yeah, well, most conventional single line systems are great, and really one of the big benefits to the single line system is that you can partially furl the sail, secure the line so it can't unfurl, and you can basically reef the sail and make it smaller so that you have a more versatile sail. Now, of course, there's trade-offs. The sails might be a little bit heavier than you want in light air, and it might be a little smaller than you want in light air. But on the other hand, in more moderate breeze or in heavy breeze, it's easy to shorten it up and basically take a lot of sail force off of the rig very quickly. And so you can see in this picture, there's a little bit of a pad right behind the luff of the sail. That's basically either can be foam or can be rope. And as the sail furls, it basically is fatter in the middle. So it takes some of the extra cloth out of the middle of the sail as you partially furl it. And the great thing about roller reefing is that not only does the foot length get shorter, but the luff length gets shorter as well as you furl. So you lose a lot of area very quickly. So you can take a sail that may be 140 or 135% when it's fully out, and within 5 or 6 or 7 turns, you're down to a working jib.
If you had to boil down some of the things that you should have in a roller furling sail, could you let us know that real quick in a summary?
Yeah, well, the pad is important, and that could be, like I said, foam or a rope system that we have at North Sails. Reef reinforcement patches are really important, like essentially an extended patch that comes down from the head on the leech and across the foot from the tack. As you partially furl the sail, having extra reinforcement on those edges is really going to help. Obviously, UV is huge, and you want the sail to have some kind of UV protection on the outside when the sail's fully rolled up and sitting out in the sun. And, you know, kind of going back to your discussion about 3D eye sails, one of the great things, and maybe if you go back and find, if you have a picture somewhere, you can see that you can't even tell that it has lots of extra reinforcement. And that's because with the 3DI method, you can actually build those extra layers into the sail without adding a lot of extra thickness. All that structure is in there in this sail. You can't even see it, and it maybe the sail gets a little bit thicker compared to with no extra reinforcement, but you won't see it. And this is another advantage of the 3DI system on mainsail reefs, is that you can barely see the reefs, and you don't have like just patches and big thick things added onto the sail for the reefs. You actually have a whole new matrix of yarns built into the sail that take the load. So the shortened sail is like the full size sail in terms of load holding. It's pretty cool.
So getting into downwind sails at Furl, which I think this is probably something that a lot of people are really interested in, because Spinnakers are great, and the word code 0 is thrown around a lot, and a lot of these new cruising boats really need some sort of off the wind sail to perform with a non-overlapping rig. Can you get into the differences between, say, top down furling for an asymmetrical spinnaker and bottom up furling for a code 0, and are they only compatible one with the other?
No, yeah, sure. This, one of the other great revolutions that's happened in the last 20 years is the idea of the cruising spinnaker that's an asymmetric sail. They're great for racing as well, but they're great for cruising because they're much easier to handle. And, furling is definitely an option for handling these sails. Like here's a top-down furler. This is a great diagram that I believe Ron Stan sent us. And you can see there's a drum at the bottom. There's a torsion rope that attaches to the swivel, and the sail attaches independently to the drum and the swivel from this torsion cable. And so the way it works is you twist the drum. As you start turning it, that torsion cable turns. And because it's linked directly to the swivel at the top, the torsion rope can spin the swivel at the top first, and it takes a bunch of the sail in, and it works its way down the sail. Hence the name top-down furling. And this really works great for sails like this in this diagram, where the sail has a lot of girth and a lot of shape in the sail. So it can gather up a lot more sail area more evenly than the bottom-up method.
Okay. Do you think that these sails have any sort of special hardware requirements on the boat, like achieving proper cable tension? Is there anything that people should look for as well to make these sails work more smoothly like they're intended to?
Well, I mean, if you can put a 2-to-1 at the tack, that'll give you a little bit more play with the tension of the torsion rope. The torsion rope needs to be tight. The good news about this style sail is you don't actually need to put a ton of load on this cable to sail the sail normally, but you do need to get it tightened up as much as you can to go to when you furl it up. So the 2-to-1 at the tack is really the best option, because a lot of cruising boats don't have an uprated halyard or halyard sheave, and you probably don't really need to do that if you can adjust the tack.
Now, bottom up, how is that different than a top down furling sail? And what is a bottom up furler typically going to be found on what type of sail?
Well, the bottom up furler works much better on either the code style sails or even sometimes in the reaching style sail, where the sections of the sail are much flatter. There's much less overall camber in the sail. There's much less leech on the sail, so it looks more like closer to a Genoa than or a jib top than a downwind style sail. So when you a bottom up furler is a lot simpler. You can put the torsion rope inside the integral into the luff of the sail, and you turn that drum. It spins the tack of the sail, and then that torsion translates up and down evenly, hopefully across the sail, and the sail rolls up pretty nicely. And we've been using bottom up, much longer than top down, and it's been reliable. Now the drawback is that over time, originally we had to use pretty big low stretch cables in these sails, and sometimes especially when you get to a bigger size boat, they had to be custom made. But nowadays we actually, if you've been up on the news, they have these so-called cableless code zeros. We actually have we've adopted a similar style of designing the sails where the structure of the luff of the sail takes the load. So you don't have to have as low stretch of a cable. And that's been a big improvement, and that's has filtered its way down. It's called Helix, and it's filtered its way down into the cruising sails as well. And so we've been able to make sails with much lighter torsion ropes in the luff and more reliable furling.
Does that make the sail easier to stow as well?
Oh yeah, the more you can reduce the weight and the stiffness in the luff of the sail, the much easier to get the thing to stow where you want it to stow, either in a Spinnaker bag or in your, in some kind of locker up in your bow, or up in the forecastle if you want. So
let's say you're a guy who wants to have, maybe you're in the luxury market where you can have both a code zero and a Spinnaker. I know all of us want to be there. Is there a furler that I can get that might do both top down and bottom up, or what kind of furlers?
Oh yeah, well, most of the furling manufacturers all have some kind of kit that has a top down ability. Like in this case, it's a Selden one. This actually has the race built into it. One of the nice things about the top down ones that you can still set the sail up to do conventional furling bottom up as well. And a lot of times the way you hook the cable and the sail into the furler.
Mm-hmm. And then with this Karver, is that an option as well?
Yeah, so this Karver is another example. You can't see it right now, but there's a little hole there underneath where that cable is attached. And that would be a little bridle where you could attach the tack of the sail. And if you wanted, like I said, with this Karver furler, you could actually just hook the tack of the sail right to where the attachment point is, where that little yellow line is sticking out, and do it in the conventional bottom-up method as well.
Well, that's good, yeah, because I think that's important for a lot of guys out there who don't want to have to buy two furlers and deal with all that. So it's nice that they're starting to come around to making, you leave the furler kind of on the deck or on your bowsprit, and then
right, yeah.
Plug in.
The guys, the shorthanded ocean boats, the smaller, 30 footers and those kind of boats, a lot of times they have a furler that just lives on the end of the sprit or lives on the deck. And they just swap the sail out depending on which one they want. And where that bridle is, if you have a top-down situation, you can put a soft shackle on that, and you just basically take the whole sail on its cable and swap it in and out. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So has that technology trickled into the other sails as well? Like when I see these 100-footers now, it seems like every sail they have is on this big noodle that they pull out of the bag and then they hoist it up and unfurl it. Oops, sorry. Like in this photo right here.
Yeah, right. And it's like you can see this sail, it's on the sort of an inner jib that they have there. The J121 is a boat that if anybody ever wanted to go check out the deck layout, or I think the Beneteau those it's not the Figaro, but the newer, or the Sunfast Jeannot 33. Those boats all have a setup where you can basically put an inner jib, has a purchase below the drum on that inner jib, and it can tension up just as tight as a regular stay. And it's a pretty slick way to do it, because you can essentially just hoist the sail up. It has its own stay built into the sail. And then if you don't want to have it out there, you can take it down and get it out of the way so your other jib can flip through normally.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of cruisers converting their boats over to kind of cutter style rigs as well, by adding an inner stay that they can furl and leave up permanently if they wanted to. But if they wanted to, pull it out of the way and stow it in a bag, they can, without having to deal with hooking up a big wire, to the deck.
Yeah, right. I mean, even a boat like, I have a customer with an Alden 44, which is an old style cutter. I mean, he's basically just gone through and replaced his wire inner stay with this kind of method, and he can basically just hoist the sail up, tension the lock it off on the cleat, and then tension it from the tack, and he doesn't have to send somebody up on the deck, and he can just furl it in and out, and then he doesn't have this big wire hanging out there.
Yeah, I think it's cool to just see all of this technology making its way down to the cruiser and the club racer to make things easier for everyone. So I think that's about everything we've gotten through today. If you need to contact either Jack or I with any specific questions, those are our emails. And Louisa, if you could jump on, and if anyone has any specific questions regarding a part of the presentation, please go ahead and ask them now, and we'll get Jack to answer.
Yep, the chat is open if you would like to drop a question in for Austin or Jack. I think you guys did such a good job. No one has any questions.
Yeah, well, I guess.
Exactly. So
they're speechless.
we have one here from Robert Alexander. Is there any system to furl hank on head sails?
Yes, there is. Ubi Mayor makes a hank-on style. That's sort of original equipment on some of the newer boats, like the J121. It works quite well. It's pretty interesting. If you only have one headsail that you're going to use, it works great, because it's got less. Oh, well, let's see. I guess the advantage of it is that when you drop the sail, if you ever had to drop it, it all lives on deck, so you don't have to worry about it falling off. And it sort of works like a top-down furler in a way, because the head of the sail is attached to the swivel, and then as you and the whole middle of the sail is attached by hanks, and as you spin the drum, spins the forestay and the top swivel at the same time, and sort of just rolls the thing up pretty quick. It rolls up very quickly and nicely. It's a pretty slick system.
And what's the name of that one again, Jack?
Ubi Mayor. It's an Italian company that makes them. And you could probably, if you look online, you can find the Euro Marine Trading is the dealer, I believe, in the U.S.
And so what Jack's describing there is essentially it's a torsional cable that lives as the forestay, which you then hank your sail on, kind of taking a step back in time, raise it up, and then you can furl it just like one of these sails that we were just mentioning.
Right, and like I say, the big advantage to it is when you drop the sail, the thing doesn't just fall off the deck like you would with a foil.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions out there, Louisa?
Tips on avoiding back wrap on top-down furlers, especially with A2.
Well,
what kind of boat
you mean is the question? Well, there's a couple things there. I guess one question is it because the drum is spinning the furling line around itself due to the torsion of the rope, or is it because the sail is not furling evenly? I guess is the question, right? What do you think, Austin?
Well, I think a couple of things could be at play there. One is making sure you have a very practiced system of keeping adequate sheet tension in the sail when you furl. I think a lot of people don't understand at first that when you do a top-down furling spinnaker, the first maybe 7 or 8 turns that you put on the drum, you're not going to really notice a whole lot happening, and then people end up doing funny things with the sheet. So I think making sure that you start building that torsion up, but still keeping, the sail's got to luff a little bit, but keeping adequate sheet tension in it through the furling process is going to help that. And 2, one thing we do find is as you get into the bigger boats, you do need, like as Jack mentioned earlier, sometimes a heftier, more custom cable to handle that torsion, because over these longer distances, some of the less expensive cables might not be able to generate enough torsion to get the sail to furl properly. And it's one of those things where you spend maybe a little bit extra more money on the cable, but the system works exactly how you want it to, and it can be worth that value there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think probably one more thing I would add to that is, well, actually 2 things. One thing is always keeping tension on the furling line.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you let go of that line, that'll allow the torsion in the cable to sort of pull on that line and get out of control on you. And then the second thing is a 2-to-1 at the tack is really important. If you do a single part line on the bottom of the furler with a lot of times they have a snap shackle or a swivel on it. When you take the load off of everything, and the amount of torsion that's built into the cable will actually spin the drum and wrap the line around. And to avoid, one of the things you can do to avoid that is put a 2-to-1, because then that puts a bigger surface area and puts 2 parts on the bottom of the drum so that it doesn't want to spin as easily.
Yeah, and I think to Jack's point about keeping tension, the other, I guess, advancement they've had is clutchable furlers, that when you're furling, some of them, like Ubi Meyer and like Faknor has a clutchable one where it'll prevent it from, if you, for example, accidentally drop the line, it wouldn't, spin the other way on you and get
it locks up.
Exactly.
All right, our last question that we have is, how much halyard tension do you want on downwind furling?
Well, when you're sailing around, you don't need to have a lot. You want to make the sail fly the right way. So typically what you want to do is get the head of the sail all the way to the top of the mast as much as possible. And then the bottom, you can sort of adjust the tack line to let the sail fly the way that it's meant to fly at the angle that you want to sail. And then when you're ready to furl, that's when you need to get that luff, tighter the better, right, Austin?
Yeah, I think, going back to the 2-to-1 point, I think that's where you really want to wind the 2-to-1 on. I wouldn't go to the point where you're having to put your biggest guy on the winch and get more turns on it. Like if you're winding it on a winch and you get to a point where you feel like, man, there's no way I can put any more turns on this, you probably have gotten enough tension and you should be fine. I think you'll the cable will tell you when you've gotten enough tension, because it won't let you won't let you pull it any tighter, and that seems to be a good starting point. And then other things, like if you have a masthead rig, you can add like a bit of backstay as well to get some extra tension on it if you need it. A fractional rig, you would get a little bit, but it's not going to be as directly applied as if you had a masthead rig.
Right. And like with all of these furling things, maybe with the exception of the roller furling Genoa, because that's really the easiest one, or jib, any of these furling methods, you really, it's not like off the shelf going to work perfectly the first time. It's going to take a little bit of time to play around with it, get all the tensions just right, get the rigging just right. And then, once you have that, you mark it so it's repeatable, then it should work smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say one final thing to add, because my father actually is a cruiser and he's got in-mast furling. And I think a common misconception, just for those in-mast guys out there in particular, is to love, just like when you do a normal sail, the thought is you get head to wind and you drop the sail, right? So a lot of people with in-mast furling, when they go to furl, they sail right into the wind and then it's flapping and they try and furl it. And what we've actually found is that if you get more on like a close haul or a reach, keeping that sail full and then furling with just a little bit of tension in it makes a much smoother and tighter furl than if you try and furl it while the sail's flapping back and forth. So that's just one final little tip for the in-mast guys out there that I've found practice, and it seems to work really, really well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like just being at the dock and rolling up the sail, it's a lot easier to do it with just a little bit of load on the sail than the thing just flopping or with no wind. It's harder to furl the sail in no wind than if you got some load on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And Austin's email is there, and so is Jack's if you'd like to get in touch with them. And this presentation will be on YouTube, so you can watch later. Thank you everyone, and have a good weekend.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks.